Now, this episode is an extremely simple 3-part framework that can help you to unblock your chakras and begin to experience the fullness of your divine potential. Hello and welcome back to the Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence. My name is Darren Ball, and this is the podcast helping you to awaken your chakras, unlock your psychic powers, and discover true spirituality. Now, in this episode, Richard shares some of the things that he's learned, some of the realizations he's had following his recent experiences of samadhi and even a glimpse of cosmic consciousness. So in the show, we'll be covering specifically why and how our chakras can become blocked, what happens when energy can flow freely through the chakras and the subtle nervous system as nature intended, and what happens when it can't. And most importantly, Richard's 3-part framework that outlines what you can do to unblock your chakras. Richard.
Darren.
So if I may say so, I think we've got a groundbreaking show in store for people today. Mm-hmm. And because in today's episode, I want to talk to people about how they can unblock their chakras, because I think you've come up with a really clear framework for helping people to understand this, which I'll call just for now the 3 secrets for removing obstacles, let's call it that, right, from your chakras. And I wanted to say from the outset that this is not just second or third-hand information. This is direct information from your own experience, which I think makes it incredibly valuable. And it's just not the kind of thing you can find really today.
Well, it's entirely based on the experiences I have had 2 in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
One was sort of dipping my toe in the ocean of samadhi, and the other was what I call entry level, or if you like, a glimpse of cosmic consciousness. And the result of that, because cosmic consciousness, not the type that Dr. King entered, which was absolutely full and complete, but as entered by ordinary mortals such as myself. And I would even say, I'm not comparing myself to them, people like Ananda, Yogananda, Arjun, and others. People like, I think Sri Aurobindo has done an account. And there are people through history, even in the West, who've had not that, but really marked samadhic or kundalini experience. They just didn't call it that. I think even if you go through cosmic consciousness, lives, we're told in the 9 precepts, ensue after it. Why do lives ensue after it? And why do you have it?
Yeah.
You have it because you need it at some point. You shouldn't dwell on it. You shouldn't go off the path of service and just bask in the bliss of it. No, you shouldn't. But it's a stepping stone, and out of it you're then better able to understand many, many, many things which will help you to gain certain experiences in your journey to ascension. And I'm becoming very aware of my failings, my blockages in my chakras, the misdirection of energy in the nadis, not down to a detail where I could draw a map, by the way, and nobody needs to bother with that detail, just the general principle of it. And I can see what needs to be rectified so that one could actually gain a complete rise, as Dr. King did.
All right, this is the benefit.
Haven't done it yet.
Yeah, but this is the benefit that we can get for the show. So I think what I'll just start with is just enough for context for people. Just what is the purpose of the chakra system, and therefore what happens if one or more chakras is blocked? I mean, why are we even talking about, why is it a problem?
Let's first of all talk about the importance of the chakras. And this is a quote from Dr. King in 1960. Without them, we could not live. We could not think. We could not have any consciousness at all in matter as we know it. None of us could be here or on this world or even in manifestation. So therefore, the psychic centers are the most valuable thing and the most vital thing in all of existence, with the exception, naturally, of course, of life itself. And it doesn't get more definite than that, you know. And I would extrapolate, by the way, and I'm not the only one, that chakras go beyond the human. Well, we know that the Mother Earth has chakras.
True.
I think the solar system has been seen as chakras, the planets in the solar system, and the sun, of course, would then be the equivalent of the crown center. And I even believe myself, or we won't get onto this, it's a whole other topic, that you could see the galaxies as chakras, the chakras of the universe.
Yeah, so they're actually like a fundamental thing throughout creation.
Absolutely, because that's where, as Dr. King says there, mind exists, where experience, through which experience can be gained. And you can work on the internal level, and you can work on the external level. You need to work at both, as a matter of fact. Very often the external level is more emphasized now because service is the order of the day. In the past, the internal level was emphasized far too much, but to the exclusion of the outer world, which was seen often as just maya, illusion.
Yeah.
But I will say, you will find even in the Upanishads, the teachings, that you mustn't neglect either. Both are vital, the inner and the outer, inner space and outer space.
Yeah. So what is it, just coming back to that question, then why is it an issue that they're blocked? I mean, why are we here thinking about how we can heal that or unblock them?
Yeah.
I suppose?
Can I just say that the spiritual practices performed within the Ethereal Society, it does relate to your question. Many of them, I won't say all of them, but many of them, and certainly some of the most important of them, and one of which is dynamic prayer and how to do it, use the chakras directly.
True, yeah.
Many of them use the nadis, that's the lines of force within the aura, of which there are thousands, but there's some very important ones which we focus on. 3 really very important ones. Many of them use the aura because these blockages at an energy level are discolorations. So you have 2 things going on. You have blockages of good thoughts and you have blockages of bad thoughts. And you can break it down, and knowing you, we will break it down. They lead to discolorations and they lead to misdirections as well. So it's not just blockages, it's misdirection of energy, which comes through habitual lines of thought through the lives.
Okay.
And I think that's one reason Dr. King was able so quickly to raise Kundalini in its entirety, because he didn't come here with lives of samskaras, as they would be called, of habitual thinking, which misdirects energies through the wrong nadis, if you like to call it wrong. And this in itself leads to what I call, I don't want to sound too wordy here, but a nadic confluence, where there's intersections of nadis which aren't helpful. And cause constriction. And in Sanskrit writings, they're often depicted as the granthis, and where you have crossovers, where there shouldn't be crossovers. And those themselves then cause blockages in the rising up of energies through the central channel in the spine, which is Susumna. I hope that's... I don't know whether that's clear or not.
Yeah, it's a good process, and I think also the point it makes there is that it's not just the chakras per se that we're talking about the wider subtle nervous system within your body.
We are, and what I want to stress is this is a real thing, it's not a theory. This is something you live with, you can sense to one degree or another, and good news, you can do something about. And the starting point is to realise that all the chakras are good and necessary, all the major 7 chakras. Obviously the minor ones too, but we're focusing on the major ones.
Sure. So you talk about 3 ways that people can unblock their chakras, and the subtle nervous system, I guess, is implied there. So what's the first one that you talk about?
Well, so these 3 ways are all completely interrelated. They are different ways of looking at the same thing. So one is thought. And I mentioned you see, we have a lot of suppression goes on within us.
Totally, everyone can emphasize
that. And every time we suppress a thought, rather than transmute a thought, or control a thought, or raise a thought, every time we suppress it, some kind of blockage is created, or some kind of misdirection is created, or both. So you have a good thought. Now, what would be an example of a good thought? A good thought would be conscience. So let us just say someone who is extremely wealthy, has far, far more money than they need, and their dependents need, and is perfectly happy, and they'll tell you they're satisfied, because some very wealthy people actually aren't very happy, and they can be very prone to being upset by the slightest thing, which wouldn't upset a more, I was going to say balanced, but certain people would get less upset by. But that's a different point. That person who's extremely wealthy, way beyond their needs, and happy, is not listening to their conscience. I don't like to be dogmatic. There are multiple examples of this. Someone who passes by, or knows of someone who's suffering, or knows of someone who's being maltreated and doesn't do something about it. They are suppressing, let's call it their conscience. someone who has an intuitive prompting, which they don't even believe to be an intuitive prompting because they are conditioned to think it's their imagination.
Sure.
So they suppress that, or they don't act on that. All those kinds of thoughts. Someone who isn't fulfilling their potential. Someone who isn't bothered, they'll tell you, about truth or why we're here, is suppressing their natural desire, because our soul, all of our souls, want this. Our souls want us to serve. Our souls want us to aspire to truth. Our souls, above all else, want us to evolve and to help all life evolve. When we go against that, we're suppressing good thoughts.
Okay.
So that's one kind of suppression.
Got
And the
it.
other is bad thoughts. Now, I would say, and this goes against some teachings, that some bad thoughts actually should be suppressed until you're ready to transmute them.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good
It
point.
isn't the end of the story, but if you
mm.
really, are a badly behaved person in one way or another, and you want to change, and you aren't yet ready to immediately internally change, in the meantime, rather than going around beating people up or abusing people or whatever, you might need to suppress it. So in some ways, the suppression of bad thoughts can be easier to deal with.
And there's a purpose for it.
Suppression of good thoughts can lead to tremendous pain.
I see.
So all these things need to be transmuted, and they all need to be redirected. And as I say, certainly in the Ethereal Society, we have the practices to do that, which is why I'm putting on an event, because I realise so many of these major practices that we do, if they're really understood and used, they can achieve this. And through thought, how would you do it? Well, you do it through truth.
Okay.
So let's take just a couple of obvious things that cause problems and cause blockages, which have been identified by the master etherists, actually.
Okay.
One is doubt, and one is fear. Now, let's start with doubt. Truth removes the stain of doubt, because doubt isn't just a series of logical questions. People may think it is. It can be an energy.
Okay.
And it can be a destructive energy. Like anxiety. Let's take anxiety as another example. But if you suffer from anxiety, and I feel for people who do, I know people who do, and it's something that is difficult for people. When you're in an anxious state, you start worrying about things that aren't that bad sometimes, but they seem enormous. If you are not in an anxious state, you still look at those same things and you see them as problems. You might even see them as opportunities or challenging problems. It's all so. These things they're not just about a logical process, or they may be presented as such. And of course, our educational system is geared to giving us critical thinking. And there's a place for critical thinking, but critical thinking isn't going to provide the answers to life on its own in a vacuum.
I see.
And we're trained down that line, and it just leads to the predication, if that's the word, or the tendency to doubt. And this can be transmuted because it's a stain. And how is it transmuted? Through truth, if at the thought level. Truth. If it's, say, for example, to take my earlier point, say you've suppressed a good thought. Let's say there's someone in your life you haven't treated as well as you could.
Okay.
And you aren't dealing with that. You aren't even looking at that. You are just going on and suppressing it and ignoring it and pushing on. And then one day you face that truth. And it's painful. And you look at yourself. Should hurt.
Yeah.
And then you think, right. Now, just by looking at it, you bring a change, an internal change, just by recognizing it. You need to do more than that, of course.
Sure.
You need to put it right with the person and so forth. But it starts with you recognizing that truth within yourself. And that redirects energies and releases the blockage of that thought or that conscience, which has been telling you this, but you haven't been listening.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I get it. No, I think that's a great example and a great way to bring it to life for people, because I'm sure we've all we all know, we can all relate to that happening
Absolutely.
within us, right? We can
I
all
mean, people go through their whole life feeling no sense, because an advanced person has a sense of responsibility. No doubt about it. Dr. King's book, You Are Responsible, he would say, and he did say, is the wrong title from a promotional point of view, because it's not popular at all.
Yeah.
But it's a fantastic message. Actually comes from a great cosmic intelligence. You are responsible. Mars Sector 6, I believe, who gave the 9 freedoms. And an advanced person has a sense of responsibility, whereas a less advanced person doesn't feel that sense of responsibility, but it's within them.
Yes.
They're just not listening to it.
Yes, yeah. I think it's a clue then of how we need to evolve, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Yeah.
So bring us on to the second one here that you would talk about in terms of the second approach.
Okay, so there's the energy
Okay.
level, which is of the same thing. So this, as I mentioned, brings a discoloration and a misdirection. Now you can change that, and this is what my workshops will mainly focus on, with a whole series of practices. Because wherever you have a thought, you have an energy.
Okay.
Wherever you have an energy, you have a thought.
Okay.
They cause each other. You can't have an illuminated thought without drawing high energy to you. You can't have a negative thought without drawing a bad, harmful. You can't have anger, or you can't have, these are inflections. It might be a red energy, for example, in certain cases. You can't have jealousy without bringing energy to you. If you get to the energy source, you will transmute it. A transmuting colour is the violet flame.
Okay.
That's a transmuter, or the colour violet, I should say. Now, just to name one practice that some of our viewers and listeners might already know, and some might not, just visualising a violet flame coming up through you, all the way through you, from the Mother Earth, will start, if you do it with enough conviction and visualisation, you'll connect with the reality of that flame. I've had that experience, probably you have, where you go beyond visualising and it's a real thing. I mean, I was running a series of events one year with others around the Mother Earth and about the Mother Earth.
Yeah.
And I went to bed one night after one of these events, and I felt like a purple man. I lay in bed, I thought I was purple, and I wasn't even trying to visualise it. This is a real thing. I've met someone who can smell it. I've never smelt it. So that's a transmuting energy. Now, there are many other practices you can use to clear these channels and also to redirect them, breathing exercises. And if you choose to take this step, you should do it with care, of using Kundalini visualizations, as taught by Dr. King. You'll redirect the energies.
Okay.
And you'll start to remove those blockages as a result, because you know, the confluence that I mentioned, the Nardic confluence, the knots, sometimes they're called granthis, the major ones, these will start to unravel and unblock when you do this.
Yeah, I think this is fascinating because you know, a lot of people will talk about, you know, yoga breathing or pranayama, but they almost position it as sort of a well-being thing rather than looking at it from an energetic standpoint and looking at, you know, when you really visualize the energies in the way that you're talking about, how it's clearing certain passages within your body to allow the prana to flow as it should flow, I guess, is the point there.
And you'll feel it. And you'll feel great sense of peace sometimes when you do it. And you'll feel that because you've released probably the heart chakra. You know, for example, when you pray the way we pray, which makes it a greater form of prayer or system of prayer than any other I know of, we activate the heart chakra. Sometimes after doing that, I know you've experienced this, and you'll feel a great sense of peace because that comes with the heart center as well, even though you've done it to pray for the betterment of others.
Right. Right. So you're saying that it's because there's a freer flow of energy there that you've begun to open that chakra?
You must, well, two things have happened. One, you've opened it, but you have to open it to channel energy through it. Two, you've drawn energy towards it by focusing on when you focus on a chakra, you draw energy towards it. So if you focus on a higher chakra, energy comes upwards towards that to some degree. And as it does, you know, you're creating, if you see it as like irrigation, you know, and the blockage is along the way, but the more you get the flow of, in this case, water, more the mud clears.
Yeah, I see. So we talked about thought and we talked about energy. What's the third one?
Well,
How
the
do you
third
describe
one
that?
is, you could definitely say the most important one, that's action, especially now. And this manifests through service. And this manipulates karma. In the old days it would be, and still is, called karma yoga. Now there are two kind of branches of that. One's a very traditional branch. You'll see it brilliantly taught in the Bhagavad Gita in a different age. I believe a very ancient age. People put down that right, that, as they say, it was a few thousand years ago, whatever. I mean, that may be when certain people wrote it down. But sure. Anyway, it could be an account taken from the Akashic records. For all I know, I would tend to believe it is, and then written down, and it could be an event that was many, many thousands of years ago. But that's not the point. What is taught in there, and is taught through Sri Krishna teaching Arjuna, is to fulfill his dharma, which you might say is his karmic duty, and that's the traditional view. If you're a householder, you fulfill your duties, you detach from the results, you work out the experiences that you require in this life as perfectly as you can, and this way you burn up your karma, you might say. But there's a greater karma yoga, which exists today, and no one's championed this or taught this better or more than Dr. George King, I believe. And that is, you don't look at what is my dharma, you don't look what have I got to work out, what experiences do I need. You look at how can I give the greatest possible service to all, to the world as a whole, in my life. Whether they're the experiences I need or not, whether it means doing the thing I love doing or not, what can I do? And you do it. Now, if you do that, you will draw the experiences they'll come anyway.
Yeah, have to.
They'll come, but they might come in a very different way. For example, let's just say you're a person who in a former life killed somebody. You've got to come back. You've got to do two things. One, you've got to experience being killed in order to learn how bad that is.
Yeah.
This would be a normal thing.
Yeah.
And two, you've got to repay some debt to that person. Now, at some point, you might put all that aside, say, what can I do? Well, actually, if you get engaged in helping the Ethereal Society in this mission, in that way, you can help to save multiple lives of people. And let's say you do, and you make sacrifices and you really dedicate yourself and you do that, and you're instrumental in helping to save multiple lives, you're burning up karma. Now, you'll still have to you might along the way then also, to do it, you're starting to appreciate what it means to lose your life. You've still got to learn the lesson.
I see.
And you could learn that internally. You will still have to repay this person, but you might do it by introducing them to such great truth in some life that it transforms them completely. It almost saves their evolution, never mind their life. It might be you might only meet them for 10 minutes. You might not even meet them. They could just hear somehow from you.
Yes.
It's like a homeopathic, you could say, dose of karmic repayment, because your focus is on something greater, not even on yourself.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. It's a great analogy because, on one way, on its face, when you first hear what you describe, you think it sounds a bit counterintuitive because you think, well, am I avoiding my problems or am I not dealing with the things? But what you've said is actually there's a higher way to look at it all.
Yeah. There's a higher way, and of course I mentioned coming back to the thoughts because they're all interrelated.
Yeah.
There is facing your own truth, but there's also learning great truth.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's so many subdivisions to all this. So when you study truth, as hopefully we're doing today, and hopefully our viewers and listeners are finding this helpful, and they're thinking about great truths, you reorientate your consciousness, and this also releases blockages every time you do it. I mean, I'll give you just one very kind of obvious example.
Sure.
If you're a person who doesn't believe in intuition and psychic powers at all, but you are a very brilliant person, you might be a scientist, for example, or a historian, or whatever you are, and you're really concentrating on it very intently, you have powers of concentration, somewhere down the line that will lead to contemplation, just through your intensity, and you will start to get impressions back, and these impressions could be either intuitive or they could be more likely psychic. But you don't believe in that. So you think this is your imagination. So you just discard it.
I see, yeah.
Just because of your programming. And this way you create blockages because you're blocking off something higher that's coming back to you. So it's almost a futility. In all your efforts, you're not moving to the next step just because of some kind of conditioning. Now, a person who studies these things will know about psychic powers, will know about intuition, and they will listen. They'll have to learn to discriminate between their imagination, we've talked about that before, and their intuition, but they'll be aware of it. So that's just one example of a teaching, a true teaching, which liberates you from various blockages.
No, I think that's great, and I think that summary you've given of those three, I mean, obviously been very brief today, but that's something which I really want to explore now in the future shows here, because I know how deep you can go into each one of these areas. It's huge, isn't it? And also because it relates to everything about our spiritual evolution and our purpose of being here on Earth.
Absolutely.
I thought maybe we just finish with that point. I mean, like, where is this all leading in the unblocking of the chakras completely?
Well, where it's leading is to ascension. But even that is, I believe, different now.
Okay.
So in the old days, and you get this from all the old teachings, they would talk about something as being a curse, being reborn on earth as a curse. They'll use that phrase. They were cursed by this god or that god, and you can see why the Lord Buddha didn't push gods.
In that context.
That context, he actually he does believe in God. As it happens, I happen to know that because of a message he got, that Dr. King got, from him. So that's a misnomer that goes out with Buddhism. But you could see why he moved away from that. Just like some of the Greek philosophers moved away from it because of the way the Greek gods had got humanized and distorted and so on. But in the old teachings, they didn't really push in the same way the importance and the value of experience. And they would regard it as a curse. What it actually is karma that needs to be worked out. But if you go up to as you go through all these, that's why even cosmic consciousness is just a step for us. It wasn't a step for Dr. King. I don't even believe he needed it. And actually, the one account he did give, he stopped short and didn't even go to the cosmos because he wanted to get back to serve the Mother Earth, basically. That's his incredible caliber. And another thing that will start to happen as you advance and awaken and the chakras, you'll start to see what teachings mean. And I'll give you just one example of that. I've done a prayer, and I know many you have, and many others have, at the end of the fourth blessing, if people know the 12 blessings.
Okay.
And it talks about a glimpse. That you're praying for others to have some small glimpse of themselves, and that this glimpse, even though but dimly seen, might be forever a monument at the crossroads of their inspiration. I know what that means now. I didn't know what that meant. It's beautifully poetic.
It is.
It's inspiring. You don't need to break it down to the chakras. But if you do break it down to the chakras, it's the point where you're moving beyond inspiration. And I would say this is when you're moving into the Christ center, which is when you start to know yourself, some small glimpse of yourself, your real self, your divine self, especially the crown center, of course. But when you're moving there, you bring about a transmutation of energies on the mental plane of inspiration called high intuition, to quote the fourth freedom. That transmutation, that's why it's a crossroads, because they are intersecting lines of force at a crossroads, which brings about a transmutation of inspiration, the crossroads of inspiration, and even the highest inspiration. And you do need to get there, and you do need to get as high as the throat center, and then you go beyond it. And because you go beyond it, it's a monument. It's from the past. It's something you've moved beyond.
What a beautiful
but it's an important one, and you want it to live forever, maybe forever a monument, because you want that to affect you always. So that, as it says in the New Lord's Prayer, another prayer, Never again will I turn from my inner vision of you.
There's a beautiful glimpse, I think, to end with there about where we're going as we begin to unblock these chakras and move onwards in our spiritual evolution. So I know we have so much that we can cover in future shows. Richard, thank you so much for sharing that framework. I think it gives people real clarity, the thought, the energy, and then also the karmic transmutation that can take place within us.
Thank you, Darren.
So first of all, we've got the mental approach, which is essentially about acknowledging and accepting truth, even profound spiritual truth. It's about correcting wrong thinking. Then we have the energetic approach, right, which is about using spiritual practices like the violet flame, like the practice of the presence, to transmute the energetic counterpart of that for essentially correcting the unnatural flow of that energy, the pooling or the damming, etc. And finally, we have the karmic approach, which is about mastering life and its many lessons through service to others, even service to the world as a whole, which is a new form of karma yoga that Dr. King has brought to the fore. Because if you think about it, the blockages are the lessons. And when we have mastered all the lessons that there are on earth, then the energy, the kundalini, the mystical power at the base of the spine can rise up the spine in a natural, unforced fashion because there is no longer anything to stop it. And at that point, we are ready for ascension, the goal of all of our lives on earth. Now, if you enjoyed that episode about unblocking the chakras, then be sure to hit that bell and subscribe because we have a huge amount of more original information coming up about the chakras in our forthcoming shows. And if you can get to London or Barnsley in the early part of March of this year, then be sure to look in the description below for more information about Richard's upcoming event, Awaken Your Chakras, Key to All Spiritual Powers. Well, for more information right now, you can check out this video over here that goes deeper into the chakras and the spiritual powers that you can experience as shared by Dr. George King, or this video over here that goes deeper into Richard's own experience of samadhi. Thanks for tuning into the show. I'll see you next time.